There is a specific kind of pounding that happens on a front door that tells you two things immediately. First, whatever dream you were having about winning the lottery while riding a jet ski is officially dead. And second, someone with a badge, a clipboard, or a very expensive God complex is on the other side. It was 8:15 on a Saturday morning. The sun hadn't even fully committed to the day yet, hanging low and lazy over the suburban sprawl of my neighborhood, a place where the grass is always green because of chemical intervention, and the silence is heavy with judgment. I was standing in the middle of my living room, wearing nothing but a pair of boxer briefs with little tacos printed on them, and holding a plastic bowl of Captain Crunch. The pounding came again, rattling the frosted glass insert of my front door. Baraza. It sounded like a SWAT team trying to synchronize their watches. "Coming! Hold your horses!" I yelled, spraying a little bit of milk onto the hardwood. I put the bowl down on the coffee table, kicked a stray sock under the couch, and unlocked the deadbolt. I swung the door open, ready to yell at a solicitor, but the words died in my throat. Two police officers stood on my welcome mat. One was older, looking like he'd seen every variety of human stupidity the city had to offer, and was just counting down the minutes until his pension kicked in. The other was younger, jacked, and had his hand resting near his belt in a way that made me very conscious of my taco underwear. "Good morning," the older one said. He didn't sound like he meant it. "Are you Mr. Mark Henderson?" "Depends," I said, Nimdarine, leaning against the doorframe and trying to look casual, which is hard when your thighs are exposed to the morning breeze. "Did I win the raffle at the fire station? Because if this is about the parking ticket from 2018, I swear I paid that online." The younger cop didn't smile. He pulled a small notepad out of his pocket. "We received a complaint, Mr. Henderson. A 911 call, actually." "A 911 call?" I blinked. "Is my house on fire? Did I sleep through a gas leak?" "Regarding a Peeping Tom incident," the older cop said, his eyes drifting over my shoulder to look into my living room. "A neighbor reported a male subject standing in this living room, using high-powered binoculars to stare into her master bedroom window for approximately 45 minutes. I stared at them. I looked down at my taco boxers. I looked back at them. "You guys are joking, right? This is a prank. Is Dave in the bushes? Dave, come out, you idiot. It's not funny." "There is no Dave," the young cop said, his voice flat. "The complainant, a Mrs. Brenda Higgins, stated that she made eye contact with you multiple times and that you were, and I quote, leering menacingly while holding a black surveillance device." Brenda, of course. It had to be Brenda. I let out a groan that started in my toes and ended somewhere in the back of my throat. Brenda Higgins lived next door. She was a woman who treated the property line like the DMZ in Korea. She once called the city on me because my recycling bin was 3 inches too far to the left on trash day. She was the kind of person who ironed her jeans and probably separated her M&Ms by color before eating them. "Officers," I said, rubbing my temples. "Brenda lives 70 feet away. Her house is across a drainage ditch and through a line of crepe myrtles. I can barely see her house from here, let alone see into her bedroom. And frankly, with all due respect to the sanctity of neighborhood relations, looking at Brenda is not how I want to start my Saturday, or end it, or spend any time in between." "She was very specific about the binoculars," the older cop said. He looked tired. He just wanted to go get a donut. I could feel it. "She said you were holding them up to your face, moving around, crouching down to get a better angle." "Crouching down," I repeated. "To get a better angle," he confirmed. "Okay," I said. "Okay, I see what's happening here. Do you guys want to see the binoculars?" The young cop tensed up. "Sir, if you have a weapon—" "It's not a weapon, Rambo." "Relax," I said, stepping back and gesturing for them to enter. "Come in, please. You have to see this to believe it. Keep your boots on, I don't care." They stepped into the hallway, hands hovering near their gear belts, eyes scanning the room. The living room was a mess of bachelor negligence. Video game cases, empty soda cans, and the aforementioned bowl of soggy cereal. But in the center of the room, lying on the rug where I had dropped it when the pounding started, was the surveillance device, I pointed at it. There, the smoking gun. The older cop squinted. He walked over and poked it with the toe of his boot. Is that a video game? It's an Oculus Quest, I said. A VR headset. I was playing Beat Saber. Do you guys know what Beat Saber is? It's a rhythm game where you slash blocks with lightsabers to the beat of techno music. That's why I was crouching. I was dodging a virtual wall of red neon blocks. That's why I was staring. I wasn't looking at Brenda's wrinkly curtains. I was looking at a high score list. The younger cop picked up the headset. He turned it over in his hands. He looked at the lenses. He looked out the window toward Brenda's house. Sarge, the blinds are closed. You can't even see the neighbor's house from this angle. Exactly. I threw my hands up. I was fighting for my life against a remix of Gangnam Style, not peeping on the Wicked Witch of the West. The older cop let out a sigh that seemed to deflate his entire posture. He took off his hat and rubbed his forehead. So, let me get this straight. You were dancing around in your underwear, blindfolded by a computer helmet. Swinging at invisible blocks? Yes, I said with as much dignity as a man in taco underwear can muster. It's cardio. The young cop actually cracked a smile. He put the headset back down. Sarge, this is the third call from her this week. Remember Tuesday? She said the mailman was a government drone. I remember, the sergeant grunted. He looked at me, his eyes softening from law enforcement to sympathetic dad. Look, Mr. Henderson, we have to follow up on calls. It's the law. But clearly there's no criminal intent here, unless having bad rhythm is a felony. It should be, I muttered. I missed a lot of notes. We'll go have a talk with Mrs. Higgins, the sergeant said, turning toward the door. But do me a favor. Maybe keep the blinds closed when you're doing your cardio, just to keep the peace. Officer, I said. Following them to the door, I will nail the blinds shut if it means I never have to hear her name again. They left, walking down my driveway with the heavy, clacking footsteps of men who were already dreading the next conversation. I watched them cross the street, heading toward the beige two-story house that loomed over the neighborhood like a mausoleum of joy. I saw the front door of Brenda's house crack open before they even knocked. She had been watching. Of course she had. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against the cool wood. My adrenaline was spiking, shifting rapidly into annoyance. I wasn't going to be able to go back to sleep. The cereal was soggy. The vibe was ruined. I went upstairs, threw on a pair of basketball shorts and a t-shirt that said, "I paused my game to be here," and walked out onto my back porch. I needed fresh air. I needed to assess the battlefield. My backyard was decent. Not huge, but big enough for a grill and a sad-looking hammock. But the problem was the sightline. Because of the way the developers had graded the land in the 90s, Brenda's house sat on a slight hill directly adjacent to mine. Her backyard sloped down toward my side yard. There was no fence, just a line of patchy shrubs that she refused to water and I refused to touch because she'd probably claim I was poisoning them. I stood on the edge of my patio, hands on my hips, staring at her house. And then, like a demon summoned by a Ouija board made of HOA bylaws, she appeared. The sliding glass door of her patio hissed open. Brenda Higgins stepped out. She was wearing a floral bathrobe that looked like it had been upholstered from a 1980s sofa. And her hair was set in curlers that looked like aggressive pink grenades. She was holding a pair of garden shears, though there was nothing on her patio to trim except the tension in the air. She saw me. She froze. Then, she marched to the edge of her patio, which was about 4 feet higher than where I was standing, giving her the tactical high ground. "You!" she screeched. Her voice sounded like a cat being dragged across a chalkboard. "I saw you! I saw the police leaving! Did they arrest you? Did they take your pervert binoculars?" "Good morning to you too, Brenda," I shouted back, shielding my eyes from the sun. "And no, they didn't arrest me because playing video games in my own living room isn't a crime. Yet. I'm sure you're working on that." "Liar!" She pointed the shears at me. "I felt it. I was changing into my day clothes and I felt a gaze. A heavy, dirty gaze. I looked out the window and there you were, with that black box strapped to your face, zooming in on me." Brenda, listen to me closely, I said, stepping off the patio and walking onto the grass. I have a VR headset, virtual reality. I was looking at a digital world. I literally could not see the physical reality of this planet, let alone you, and honestly, that's a feature, not a bug. Don't get smart with me, you deviant. Her face was turning a shade of red that clashed with the pink curlers. I have grandchildren who visit. I can't have a predator monitoring my property. I'm going to call the HOA. I'm going to call the mayor. My nephew works for the sanitation department. He can have your trash cans confiscated. My trash cans? I laughed. It was a dark, hollow laugh. You're going to weaponize the garbage men? That's your play? I want you to stop looking at me, she screamed, stamping her slippered foot. I don't want to see your ugly face looking at me. Every time I look out my window, I see you lurking in your kitchen, lurking in your yard. I live here, I yelled back, my patience finally snapping like a dry twig. I am existing in my own home. If you don't want to see me, close your blinds. I shouldn't have to hide in my own home, she shrieked. You are the nuisance. You are the blight. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you are. A peeping Tom. A voyeur. She was shaking, actually shaking with rage. It was terrifying and fascinating all at once. This woman had invented an entire narrative in her head, where I was obsessed with her, instead of the reality of her, which was that I actively tried to forget she existed. You know what, Brenda? I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. You're right. You shouldn't have to see me, and I definitely, 100% do not want to see you. Then move, she spat. No, I said. I'm not moving, but I am going to fix this. You want privacy? You want to make sure my ugly face never darkens your horizon again? Done. Consider it handled. What does that mean? She narrowed her eyes. Are you threatening me? I'm promising you, I said, turning my back on her. Be careful what you wish for, Brenda. I'm watching you, she yelled as I walked back into the house. I have eyes everywhere. I slid the glass door shut and locked it. My heart was pounding. I went to the fridge and grabbed a soda, cracking it open and taking a long swig. My hands were shaking a little. Not from fear, but from the sheer, unadulterated adrenaline of a suburban feud going nuclear. She wanted a war? She wanted to talk about sightlines and privacy? Fine. I walked into my office and sat down at my computer. I woke the screen up. I didn't open a game. I didn't open Netflix. I opened Google. And I typed, City Residential Zoning Code Section 4. Barriers and partitions. It was time to build. The escalation didn't happen over weeks. It happened over days. It was a blitzkrieg of petty. By Monday, Brenda had installed cameras. Not just a Ring doorbell, but industrial-looking cameras mounted on the corners of her eaves, pointed directly at my kitchen window and my back patio. They had little red lights that blinked, reminding me that Big Brother was actually an elderly grandmother with too much time on her hands. By Tuesday, the audio warfare began. At 6 a.m. sharp, I was woken up not by my alarm, but by the screeching violins of what I assumed was Mozart, but played through a blown-out speaker pointed at my bedroom window. When I looked out, I saw a boombox sitting on a folding chair on her deck, facing my house. She wasn't even outside. She had just set it up to torture me. By Wednesday, the cops were back. This time I called them. Officer Miller, the tired one from Saturday, looked like he wanted to cry when he saw me. She's blasting opera, officer, I said, gesturing to the boombox, which was currently playing Ride of the Valkyries. It's 7:30 a.m. There has to be a noise ordinance. Miller sighed, checking his watch. Technically, sir. The noise ordinance ends at 7 a.m. on weekdays. Unless it exceeds 80 decibels, she's allowed to play music. She has cameras pointed at my kitchen. I pointed at the red blinking lights. She's watching me make toast. How is that legal? It's her property, Miller said, shrugging. As long as she isn't recording audio conversations or filming inside a bathroom, she's allowed to have security cameras. It's a civil matter, son. Unless she physically touches your property or threatens you with bodily harm, we can't do much. You guys need a mediator. I don't need a mediator, I said, staring at the camera lens which I knew Brenda was watching from her living room lair. I need a barrier. Good luck, Miller said, getting back in his cruiser. Fences in this neighborhood are strictly regulated by the HOA. 4 feet high. Tato. Chain link or picket only. You can't block the communal aesthetic. I watched him drive away. The opera music swelled. I looked at Brenda's house. I could see her silhouette in the window, holding a cup of tea, watching me. She thought she had won. She thought she had me checkmated by the bureaucracy of the Homeowners Association and the passivity of the police force. But she had made a critical error. She assumed I was a normal person. She didn't realize she was dealing with a petty freelance graphic designer with insomnia, a credit card with a high limit, and a deep-seated need for malicious compliance. I went back inside and dove into the paperwork. I pulled up the city statutes. I pulled up the HOA covenants. I read through 70 pages of dry, legal jargon about setbacks, easements, and material requirements. And then I found it. It was buried in a sub-clause from 1974, a relic of a time when the city was trying to encourage artistic beautification in residential zones. City Code 14B, subsection 3. While residential perimeter fences are limited to 4 feet in height, freestanding artistic installations, or windbreak structures, intended to protect soil integrity on properties adjacent to drainage zones, see nuisance lots, may extend up to 10 feet in height, provided they do not obstruct public roadways. I froze. I reread it. Nuisance lots. I pulled up the city survey map. My property was designated Residential A. Brenda's property, because of the drainage ditch running behind it, was flagged with a jagged red line. Zone D, drainage nuisance runoff. I smiled. It was a slow, terrifying smile. Brenda lived on a nuisance lot. Itro. And because her runoff flowed toward my yard, I had the legal right to build a windbreak structure. And because of the artistic installation clause, it didn't have to be a fence. It could be art. 10 feet of art. I printed the page. I highlighted the paragraph in neon yellow. Then I picked up my phone. I didn't call a fence company. Fence companies follow rules. Fence companies are afraid of HOAs. I needed someone who hated rules. I dialed a number a buddy of mine had given me years ago, a guy who did custom contracting. Yellow, a voice answered. It sounded like the guy had been gargling gravel and whiskey. Hi, I said. Is this Tony? Who's asking? My name is Mark. I have a neighbor who accused me of being a peeping Tom because I was playing VR. She's currently blasting opera at my house and has cameras pointed at my kitchen. I have a loophole in the city code, a budget, and a desire for revenge. There was a long silence on the other end. Then a lighter flicked, a deep exhale. I'm listening, Tony said. I need to build a 10-foot wall, I said. But legally it's a windbreak and an art piece. 10 feet? Tony chuckled. It was a dark, joyful sound. Kid, for a neighbor like that, we can go 10 feet. We can go reinforced. We can make it earthquake-proof. When do you want to start? Yesterday, I said. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Tony said. Put the coffee on. I like it black, like my soul. I hung up the phone. Outside, the opera music finally stopped, only to be replaced by the sound of a lawnmower starting up, despite Brenda having no grass, only rocks. I walked to the window and waved at her camera. Game on, Brenda. Tony arrived in a truck that looked like it had survived a war in the desert. It was a Ford F-350, lifted so high I could barely see the driver's seat, painted a matte black that seemed to absorb the sunlight. The exhaust pipe was the size of a cannon. He parked it directly in front of my house, half on the curb, blocking my mailbox. A man stepped out. He was shaped like a vending machine, wide, square, and solid. He wore work boots, jeans covered in mysterious stains, and a t-shirt that said, OSHA is a suggestion. He had a cigar clamped between his teeth, unlit. Mark, he grunted, slamming the truck door. The sound echoed down the street. That's me, I said, walking out to meet him. Tony didn't shake my hand. He just nodded and walked past me. So, marching straight into my backyard like he owned the place. He stopped at the edge of the patio, took the cigar out of his mouth, and squinted at Brenda's house. That the target? he asked, pointing with the cigar. That's her, I confirmed. Tony grunted. He looked at the cameras. He looked at the boombox. He looked at the drainage ditch. She got runoff? Yeah, when it rains, my yard turns into a swamp, I lied. It only got a little damp, but I felt the exaggeration was morally justified. Good, Tony said. Structural necessity. That's the magic word. We build a retaining wall foundation. Reinforced concrete. Posts every 4 feet. 6 by 6, pressure treated. We sheath it in 3/4-inch marine-grade plywood, then face it with cedar planks on your side so it looks pretty. And on her side? I asked. Tony turned to me. Shh, a glint in his eye. On her side? We leave it raw, or you said artistic installation. The code says it can be considered art, I said, handing him the printout. Tony read it. He laughed. Kid, you're evil. I like you. Okay, here's the play. We apply for the permit today. My cousin works at the zoning office. He hates HOAs. His ex-wife was an HOA president. He'll rubber stamp this by lunch. Can we really build it 10 feet high? I asked, looking up. 10 feet was massive. It was a monolith. The code says 10, Tony said. We build it 10, maybe 10 and an inch, just to see if anyone brings a ladder. It'll block her view, her son, and her Wi-Fi signal if we use the right shielding. Do it, I said. How much? Tony named a price. It was expensive. It was there goes my vacation fund expensive. I looked at Brenda's house. I saw the curtain twitch. She was watching us. Worth every penny, I said. When can you start? I got lumber on the truck, Tony said. I got a post hole digger in the back. We break ground now. The permit will catch up to us. The next 3 days were a blur of beautiful, chaotic construction. Tony didn't work alone. He called in a crew of 3 guys who looked like they were on day release from a Viking reenactment society. They didn't talk. They just carried lumber and drank energy drinks. The first conflict happened when the lumber delivery arrived. A massive flatbed truck backed into my driveway, beeping loudly. Brenda came running out of her house like she had been shot out of a cannon. What is this? She screamed, standing at the edge of the property line. You can't do this. This is a residential neighborhood. You can't bring heavy machinery here. Tony walked over to the property line. He towered over her. Ma'am, step back. This is a construction zone, hard hat area. I am calling the police, she yelled. Go ahead, Tony said, lighting his cigar. Ask for Sergeant Miller. He knows the code. She did call the police. The same poor officers showed up. They looked at the permit Tony had taped to my back door. They looked at the city code printout. It checks out, ma'am, the officer said to Brenda, who was vibrating with rage. He has a permit for a windbreak structure. A windbreak? She screeched. There is no wind. It's a sunny day. Preparing for hurricane season, ma'am, Tony deadpanned. We live in Ohio. We don't get hurricanes. Brenda stormed back inside. 10 minutes later, she turned the hose on. She stood on her patio with a garden hose, spraying water over the property line, aiming for the hole where Tony was pouring concrete. Watering my plants, she yelled when we looked at her. Just watering the air. Tony didn't even flinch. He picked up a sheet of plywood and held it up like a shield, deflecting the water. Keep it coming, lady, he roared. Cures the concrete faster? She threw the hose down and stormed inside. By Friday afternoon, the posts were set. They stood like sentinels, 10 feet tall, casting long, imposing shadows across Brenda's yard. Her prized petunia bed, which required 6 hours of direct sunlight, was now plunged into eternal darkness. On Saturday, the facing went up. It was glorious. The sound of nail guns was the music of my liberation. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Every nail was a testament to my freedom. By sunset, the wall was finished. It was magnificent, a solid 10-foot-tall barrier of wood that completely erased Brenda's house from my existence. I stood on my patio. I couldn't see her windows. I couldn't see her cameras. I couldn't see her face. I popped a beer and toasted the wall. Tony clapped me on the shoulder. She's done, boss, he said. But we ain't finished. You said artistic installation. I did, I said. The side facing her is just plywood right now, Tony said. Ugly, rough, splintery? Perfect, I said, but not perfect enough. I pulled out my phone again. I have one more call to make. I called a guy named Snake. Snake was a local muralist who usually got paid by the city to paint over graffiti, but who secretly was the best graffiti artist in the tri-state area. Snake, I said when he answered. How would you like to paint a masterpiece? I have a canvas. It's 10 feet tall, 40 feet wide, and it belongs to the devil. What's the subject? Snake asked. I want an eye, I said. A giant, realistic, bloodshot eye, looking right at her. I want the pupil to be so detailed you can see the reflection of her soul in it. I can do that, Snake said. I can make it look wet. Make it look wet, I agreed. Snake arrived on Sunday morning with a van full of spray paint cans. He set up scaffolding on the Brenda side of the fence. Since the fence was technically on my property, we had set it 6 inches inside the line. We were legally allowed to stand there. Brenda came out. She looked up at the 10-foot plywood monstrosity. She looked small, defeated. You can't leave this here, she said. Her voice was trembling. It's hideous. Dave, it blocks my sun. It lowers my property value. It's a windbreak, Brenda, I called down from the top of the fence, where I was sitting on a ladder. And don't worry about the aesthetic. We're beautifying it right now. It's going to be art. Art? She asked, suspicious. A mural, I said. Dedicated to neighborhood watchfulness. Since you love watching so much, I thought you'd appreciate it. Snake went to work. He was a wizard. He sketched the outline in charcoal, then started filling it in. He worked fast. Brenda went inside to call the HOA again. But it was Sunday. No one answered. By the time she came back out 3 hours later, it was done. It was terrifying. The eye was 8 feet wide. It was hyper-realistic. The iris was a piercing electric blue. The sclera, the white part, was veined with red, on, making it look manic and unblinking. The pupil was jet black, and Snake, true to his word, had painted a tiny, distorted reflection of Brenda's house inside the black void. It looked exactly like someone was peering through a giant keyhole, staring directly into her living room window. All done, Snake said, stepping back and wiping paint off his hands. I climbed down the ladder and walked around to the front to see the full effect. Brenda stepped out onto her patio. She looked up. She screamed. It wasn't a normal scream. It was the sound of a psyche snapping. She dropped her tea mug. It shattered on the pavers. My God, she yelled, clutching her chest. It's demonic! It's looking at me! It's art, Brenda, I shouted from behind the safety of my wall. It represents the duality of man. The gaze of the observer. Take it down, she shrieked. I can't have that eye watching me eat breakfast. Now you know how I felt, I yelled back. Just close your blinds, Brenda. If you don't want to see it, just close the blinds. The aftermath was exactly what you'd expect. The HOA called an emergency meeting on Tuesday night. The community center basement was packed. People who never came to meetings showed up just to see the photos. Brenda stood at the podium, trembling, holding a printed photo of the giant eye. It is satanic, she wailed. It is harassment. He built a spite fence. The board turned to me. The president was a guy named Dave, who I knew for a fact hated Brenda because she once measured his grass with a ruler. Mr. Henderson, Dave said, trying to hide a smile. Is this fence compliant? It is not a fence. Dave, I said, sliding the permit across the table. It is a windbreak structure and artistic installation, permitted under City Code 14B. The artwork is a modernist piece titled The Neighbor's Burden. It is protected speech. Dave looked at the permit. He looked at the photo of the eye. He looked at Brenda, who was vibrating. Well, Dave said, the paperwork seems to be in order. You can't be serious, Brenda screamed. It looks like Sauron is living in his backyard. However, Dave said, raising a hand, we do have guidelines about intensity. Mr. Henderson, would you be willing to modify the mural slightly? To soften the gaze? I pretended to think about it. I rubbed my chin. I suppose, for the good of the community. Good, Dave said. Motion passed. The structure stays. The eye gets softened. I walked out of that meeting feeling like I had just won the Super Bowl. The next day I had Snake come back. "What are we doing?" Snake asked. "Painting over it?" "No," I said. "We're complying. The HOA wants it softened. Give it eyelashes." Snake laughed so hard he fell off his crate. He added long, luscious, cartoonish eyelashes to the giant, bloodshot eye. It didn't make it better. It made it look like a drag queen having a nervous breakdown. It was even more disturbing. Brenda never complained again. In fact, she stopped going out on her patio entirely. She installed heavy blackout curtains on every window facing my house. She planted a row of fast-growing cypress trees on her side of the fence, desperate to block the view of the eye. I won. I was sitting on my back porch a month later. The sun was setting. The massive cedar wall glowed warm and golden. I couldn't see Brenda's house. I couldn't hear her opera. I couldn't see her cameras. I only saw the beautiful, clean grain of the wood. I put on my VR headset. I loaded up Beat Saber. I selected the hardest song I had. "They say good fences make good neighbors," I said to the empty air, swinging my lightsabers. But a 10-foot spite fence with a giant eyeball? That makes for a quiet life. And for the first time in years, I danced like nobody was watching. Because thanks to the wall, nobody was.